Are you authoring a plugin that depends on other plugins to be configured in a certain way first? In this video, you will learn how your plugin can apply dependent plugins to the project and configure them as needed. Our plugin makes use of the JaCoCo plugin to measure code coverage. The JaCoCo plugin needs to be applied and configured to correctly record the coverage to an XML file so our custom task can read it. Currently, in our consumer project, we apply the JaCoCo plugin and add configuration for it. Ideally, we want our plugin to apply the JaCoCo plugin and this configuration so the end user doesn't have to. In our plugin class, in the apply method, we can add a statement to apply the JaCoCo plugin. On the project object, we can access the plugins variable and apply the JaCoCo plugin. The JaCoCo plugin requires the Java plugin, so let's apply that too. Next, we want to configure the JaCoCo plugin so it generates the XML file our plugin needs. We can take the configuration we had applied to the consumer project and use that as a starting point. Because this is not the build file, but a Kotlin plugin class file, we'll need to make a few changes. First, we need to use the project object. Then we need to specify the class type in the method parameters. And we need to have a variable for the task available in the block so we can configure it. And finally, here in the plugin class, the equal assignment here won't work. The variable required is a property of Boolean. So we'll need to change it to use set. Let's build the plugin to ensure there are no issues. And we can test the new behavior in the consumer project. We'll go ahead and remove the JaCoCo plugin from being applied. And also delete this configuration. We'll reload the project so it picks up the latest build as well. To confirm that the JaCoCo plugin is still being applied, we can check the available tasks. We can see the JaCoCo tasks are still available. That means our plugin is correctly applying the JaCoCo plugin. If we run the log coverage gains task, we can see it still runs. And since we've already achieved the goal of 55%, it doesn't update the file. Great! Everything is working as we expect it to. Our plugin is now applying the JaCoCo plugin and adding the required configuration, so the end users of our plugin won't have to do this themselves. There is one behavior still missing though. If the coverage ever drops below the value in the coverage file on a CI machine, we want the build to fail. So if we comment out a test in the consumer project, the coverage should now drop since we've commented out a test. If we run the log coverage gains task again, the plugin mentions that the coverage is now 40%, which is lower. However, the task didn't fail. We'd want the build to fail if the coverage has dropped below the value in the file, which is at 55%. We have two options on how to have a failure when the coverage drops. The first is to use the JaCoCo plugin to enforce coverage metrics. In our plugin class, we can add this sort of configuration to ensure that if the coverage drops below the value in the file, there is a failure. This would be similar to how we added configuration to ensure the coverage XML file is generated. The other option is to check if the coverage drops inside our custom task type. We can go to the task type, and in the logic that checks to see if the new coverage is greater than the one recorded in the file, we can add a separate conditional to check if the value drops as compared to the file. So here, it checks to see if the current coverage is now greater than the file. So we'll say if the current coverage is now instead less than the file, we can fail the build. We can do so by throwing an exception. It is recommended to throw a Gradle exception. Now when we build the plugin and switch to the consumer project and run the task, we can see it fails now with the appropriate error message. 0.4, which is 40%, is less than the recorded value of 55%. Now that we apply and configure the JaCoCo plugin in our plugin class, we can update our unit test to not apply the Java and JaCoCo plugins. The test should still pass since they are applied in the plugin class. In the next chapter, we will learn how to author functional tests.